We are live. We are live right now on YouTube. So yeah, we are starting in time, and I'm happy to start this second day of our 48 hours non-stop online conference. We got a lot of experience with this for the first day. So right now we are fixing many issues. So and this panel, I believe, is one of the most amazing panels in the conference. So thank you all for joining our Digital Week Online. So and we have here Rulena Say, who is CEO of Jumpstart Magazine, and she will be moderating this panel. So Patrick Tsang, the chairman of Tsang Group, Jane Chan from Invest Hong Kong, head of InvestHK. So Jason Su, is it correct? My pronunciation?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Fine. So former congressman of Taiwan, and William Balbin, who is the general partner of SOSV Accelerator. Thank you all, and Relena, I'm passing the word to you. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivan. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm very excited to be moderating a panel of incredible speakers today who will be sharing insight on the state of Asian tech, where we are today, and what's next. So, Ivan mentioned, I'm Relena. I'm the CEO of Jumpstart. Jumpstart is a startup ecosystem builder headquartered here in Hong Kong. And for those who don't know, we're best known for Jumpstart Magazine, and that's our print publication that is distributed across 11 countries. So with us today, we really do have a panel of incredible speakers. Ivan already gave a very short introduction, but I just want to give a little bit more background on each of our speakers. We have William Baobin, who is a general partner at SOSV and a managing director at CHINACCELERATOR. We have Patrick Tsang, who is the chairman of the Tsang Group. And Patrick is a seasoned investor with a track record of success in numerous IPOs and M&A transactions. And we have Jane Chan, who's the head of Start Me Up HK at InvestHK. And for our listeners abroad, InvestHK is the government department that is responsible for attracting and retaining foreign direct investment into Hong Kong. And finally, we're also very lucky to have Jason Xu, who is a technologist turned legislator and who is currently serving as a legislator at large in Taiwan's parliament. And he helps oversee technology development, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So thank you and welcome to everyone. I'd like to get us started with a quick introductory question. What makes the Asian tech space unique? William, do you have some thoughts on this?
I think I need to unmute. Yeah, so three things. The first is that Asia is not like one place. It's many, many, many different places. It's quite fragmented. So if you say North America, that's kind of a market. If you say Europe, it's fragmented, but to some extent, because of the EU and whatnot, it's a market. But Asia is very, very fragmented. The second thing is that you can run pretty lean. In a bunch of markets, it's so expensive to operate that it's tough to be lean. But as startup entrepreneurs in Asia, you can actually get things going relatively cheaply. Talent, good talent is always hard to find, but running costs, you can go super lean. And then I'd say the third thing is that the market, unless you're in China, where I am right now in Shanghai, or maybe in India, perhaps Indonesia, home markets are not big enough to build a real company or a big company. So people used to say, "Oh, go global," and then other people said, "No, don't go global." Our view, I mean, we help companies go cross-border. CHINACCELERATOR's focus on enterprise and China market entry, and Mox on consumer. And we think it's important to go global, perhaps not in year one, but maybe in year 2 or year 3, because unless you're in multiple markets, you're probably not going to be big enough to make much of a dent in the market.
Wow, great insight. What about you, Patrick? Do you have any specific thoughts?
Thanks, Relena. I agree with what William said. It is very fragmented in lots of markets. We're a bit more, have more expertise in places like China, like William, where it's more of a winner takes all kind of environment right now. So it's the big guys eating up a lot of small guys, like in the US. So places like Europe, where like Sweden, Norway, Finland, they have a lot of good tech startups. But as William pointed out correctly, the population size is too small. So they go very early stage to the US to, to grow and scale, like Skype, Spotify, and so forth. But only big markets like China, India, do have such a vast population. You're able to exploit the scalability. And one of the biggest difficulties in Asian tech is it's very difficult for one business model to get into, other markets. Like Japan's on its own, Korea is on its own, China innovates on its own. We have, the big, WeChat social networking app, which has transcended borders, but essentially it's just used by Chinese people. So it's not like, English people using it, American people using it. It's Chinese people in America using it, or it's American people who have Chinese friends or Chinese business before they do that. So it's still very segregated, as it were, but it really depends on what you want to do. Secondly, I don't think there are that many true global tech companies like Google, Facebook, all the big American companies. None of them are really in China, for instance. And then all the Chinese companies, which are big, like Alibaba, Tencent, JD, and so on, are not really outside China in their home market. So it's still either you're very US Western or you're very Chinese or Japanese. So that's something that proposes a opportunity.
Interesting. Jane?
I think, taking on board both Patrick and William's comments about Asia being a very fragmented and very disparate kind of countries and cities. That notwithstanding, I think the fundamental difference between Asia and maybe the Western side are the numbers. I actually think, the half the world's population is living in Asia. One of our classic things that we say, Hong Kong really is in the midst of all that. Within 5 hours flight, you've got half the world's population. And even though you do have, very different kind of cultures and environments and things, I actually think that there is some kind of, ability for Asian kind of startups to go to other Asian kind of borders. I think there's a level of fine tuning that's required for sure. And, and some tech may definitely not make sense to be, coming from Indonesia and then going to somewhere like Vietnam, for example. There's definitely those kind of differences. But I also think that there is an opportunity to also fine tune the business model to actually meet the requirements in those countries. And we're talking about Asia tech having, the Asian kind of space having a lot of like consumers with half the world's population living there. What kind of tech is really good for that? So things that does transcend borders to a certain extent is AI side, the machine learning side. So the great thing about having those big populations, whether we're talking China, we're talking India, we're talking even Vietnam, Indonesia, those kind of places, that data does help to make for better models. And with better data, better models, we get more meaningful insights. If we are talking by extension, what's Asia good for then is that if you're looking at consumer tech that addresses the needs of the masses, and that's also very intuitive, I think there is a business opportunity there. Also, if you look at Asia's kind of unicorns, the top unicorns, for example, is very much in the consumer tech space, whether we're talking e-commerce, whether we're talking AI, whether we're talking logistics tech. So whilst I do appreciate that every market is different, I still feel like Asia in general has the numbers, and it makes sense for us to try and leverage those numbers by deploying tech like AI, like e-commerce and things. I think there is an opportunity there.
Yeah, it sounds like Asia is a land of opportunities. Jason, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so basically they all kind of already covered the gist of the Asia's specialties. But I do want to emphasize on some of the important trends that are going on in the world. I think as the COVID-19 sort of sweeping the world over, I think Asia is quick to recover because of our past experience with SARS and MERS and other things. If you look at Taiwan, we've done very well during this period of time. But if you also look at other countries, for example, like Vietnam, Korea, and Singapore, who actually were hit, but then they recover pretty fast. And how does this reflect on the startups and investments and the technology in general? I think you are seeing a really young region with a population that is really dense and that is really quick to respond to situations. So you have countries like Vietnam and Philippines, whose average age is below 30 and whose population is over 100 million people. And you have, big market size like China, who's basically can build anything on its own, and it has its own ecosystem. And so this region is going to continue to matter in the years to come, and I would say it's going to play a much more important role after the wake of COVID-19, and the West, Europe, and the US will further sink into a deeper slowdown or stagnation, where Asia will be really quick in moving things forward. So I'm very bullish and optimistic just in tech categories, as been mentioned by previous speakers, including AI, machine learning, logistics tech, blockchain, and many other things in general.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's right. With the whole coronavirus situation, that's definitely something that everyone has to face. That's the new reality now. And in fact, the corona pandemic has brought to the forefront the need for new technology, or technology that's been around, but certain technology has been brought to the forefront, such as new forms of entertainment like Instagram Live, virtual meetings like Zoom, webinars. So William, I want to ask you, how has the pandemic influenced thinking, investment strategies for you?
So it's a little weird, but we're constantly changing things. So China entered kind of a funding winter, September 2018. That didn't really affect us so much because we didn't actually get any benefit from the funding bubble in the first place. Because we do cross-border, and cross-border has not traditionally been that popular among investors. It's been more traction than fundraise, as opposed to fundraise than traction. So we just ran the data, and over the last 9 months, the valuations we've been paying, and we were early stage, but the valuations we've been paying have been cut in half. We're paying a lot less. Now, the reason for that is not that we're pushing down the valuations. It's just that the companies that we're investing in have more revenue than before. But we ran the data January, which is basically pre-COVID, versus April, which for China is kind of post-COVID, but just recovering. And we're we're top 10 most active investor in India, number 6 in Southeast Asia. And over the last 80 companies we've invested in 2018, 2019, and 2020 for cross-border, it is 80 companies. We actually got from January to April 61% net revenue growth across the portfolio. So our travel companies got pretty well trashed. And because we were in China, we saw things coming early. A lot of our companies furloughed everybody and went into hibernation or pivoted pretty hard, pretty fast. But as an internet investor, we're heavy in media, fintech. Most pieces of fintech have done quite well. Education, we're quite heavy in, and cross-border commerce, e-commerce, and then we've done over 10 companies in like local delivery, local services, servicing mom and pops. And we added a delivery function very quickly to those companies because the stores were all closed. And as things have opened up, they're doing pretty well. So I think it's going to hit people, different companies differently, and different funds differently. If you saw when we logged on, I had my cockroach logo. So we invest in cockroaches. You can step on them. They might lose a leg or two, but they keep on going. And so, yeah.
Wow, yeah. Patrick, I know you're also in the finance space, and you have an incredible track record of, with existing companies via IPO and M&A. So you've heard William's side of it. A lot of quick action, quick reaction, even a lot of positive message. What is your outlook going forward in 2020 and 2021 in terms of such deals? And are you looking at a potential slowdown in this space?
I believe that there's definitely a slowdown. There's definitely money out there. There's cash out there. People are making decisions more slowly. People are more cautious. I'm looking at the second half of this year and next year. There'll be a lot of bargain companies and bargain, startups with lesser valuations, companies with lesser valuations for investors to come in. But I think this year will be very difficult for most people. Obviously, you have sectors like e-commerce, esports, logistics, food delivery. A lot of these areas have gone way up during the pandemic, but obviously the traditional businesses like retail and other businesses have gone very downhill. All these airlines, Hertz, everything going bankrupt. So what will happen is the difficulty for startups will be the length of time needed to get to cash flow positive will take much longer. So I think investors have to take a different kind of position where instead of just throwing money at entrepreneurs, they really have to be more involved. So I've been using this term a lot. You have to be a little bit in terms of like an activist investor, where you have to get involved, use your own network, your resources to try and help the entrepreneurs to get further and get on the train of the cash flow positive as quickly as possible, and to see if you have any existing businesses or contacts that can help the business go much faster. So I think for a general person that's working, it's not looking good for the next 12 to 18 months. For entrepreneurs, their job is to solve problems. So if you solve problems well, you get paid for it. So there's definitely opportunities out there. For investors like ourselves, there's actually a lot of opportunities. So we're quite bullish in terms of where to go. So the sectors that we're looking at a lot right now is AI, fintech, biotech, and robotics.
Okay, wow. Well, a lot of this background market, it all depends on the reaction between the market itself and the government. So Jane, as someone with a bird's eye view on the development ecosystem in Asia, what role do you think government will play in the development of acceleration of Asian tech generally, and unforeseen challenges like COVID-19?
Okay, I'm a big believer that we do need some pretty fundamentals. If we're trying to build a strong startup ecosystem, we do have to have certain fundamentals in place. For me, those fundamentals are pretty straightforward. It's access to market, it's access to funding, and access to talent. I think any ecosystem around the world, if you don't have these kind of foundations in place, then you're going to have a hard time trying to really force your startup ecosystem to try and grow. And so we actually spend quite a lot of time as an Invest Hong Kong trying to develop those kind of sections. Invest Hong Kong is not a policy-making department. So we are, focused on inward FDI, focused on supporting overseas companies around the world, particularly really strong kind of companies that can come to Hong Kong and basically make a positive socio-economic impact. That notwithstanding, in any kind of city that is trying to build a strong economy, whether we're talking startups, whether we're talking industry in general, you've got to have policies in place in order to basically support that constituent group as much as you can. For me, that's focused on startups. And what I do is, we are, I suppose, on the front lines a little bit. And what we do is we go out and meet a lot of companies, whether we're talking about startups or other stakeholders like investors, like the accelerators, the incubators, all these other types of companies. We basically talk to them a lot, and we try to reflect the views of the kind of issues that they're encountering, or any actually really positive stories as well we can potentially share, just to provide an extra level of learning for that next generation of startups. So we do a lot of that kind of reflection from the front line, so to speak, to the policy making departments, and where it makes sense, we try to connect them, and just so we can make sure that whatever we are doing in terms of the policy side really does help rather than hinder. Now, that notwithstanding, you're talking governments. there's some, incredibly advanced and, technically advanced kind of governments around the world, but those are very few far between, to be frank. And so there's always this lag, of course, between innovation and governments trying to keep up with all of that. So it's always, it's always a challenge and an opportunity also to basically address what's really needed, at any given time. But I do think the government has a massive kind of role to play, and we need to make policies relevant and really valuable. Actually, don't just do something because we're seeing other kind of countries, cities doing it, but what really works for us in our ecosystem is very different from what's happening, in a lot of other kind of cities. So we need to be very cognizant of what's happening on the ground and then bring the policies to match it. Really look inside ourselves and say, okay, where are the gaps that really need filling? So I've mentioned before that the government has launched a whole number of kind of like, whether we're talking financial support schemes or other kind of regulatory kind of relaxation to allow startups to try different things under testing conditions. So there's all these kind of things going on, but there will always be, a catch-up phase, as well as, at a time where government has to basically try to regulate or, support industry where we may not be as aware of the tech implications of it. It's a big thing. So there's all these different kind of things at play. But with regards to the pandemic, I mean, there's not a single playbook for this. This is something that no one in the world thought was going to happen to the extent that it has, and everyone is trying to react and cope with all of that for their respective constituents, their people, their industry. In Hong Kong, again, we've basically also launched a number of different kind of funding schemes, whether we're talking about having supporting companies who are to retain staff as opposed to laying them off, or giving them a financial incentive to adopt the latest technologies in order to basically enhance the operations going forward. Because in this world of social distancing and lockdowns, a lot of companies in Hong Kong are doing global business. So there's got to be that kind of support there as well. But it is a very new thing, and we're hoping that we can actually just do whatever we can within the government's remit to try and support companies, not just startups. We're talking about the multinationals that are leading, SMEs that are also having a very tough time, startups that are especially vulnerable, just because they've got to have a slightly longer runway before they get to profitability, and a whole bunch of other things. But the nice thing about startups is that they're also very quick to change. They can pivot very quickly as well, and we're hoping that's going to stand them in quite good stead, going forward. I noticed some of the more big tech companies to doing a whole bunch of other things, delivering food and stuff like that they hadn't really done before. I mean, that's the benefits about startups. They can sort of like be change and adapt a little bit more. But I think it's this pandemic is tough for a lot of people.
It's been tough. Jason, I know you're also involved in the regulation space. I had a question for you. In terms of regulation digital solution, what that is ahead, and in what ways do you think we're behind? Do you think there are any major issues installing regulation?
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to also previous questions, some of my feedback. So we see this period as a very good period for merger and acquisition. And I think this is also a good period for startups to consider the company direction and also to pivot. And if your startups are not doing well, I would say, close it down. Now is the best time to close it. There's no better time to switch and pivot. And I think one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs to face is whether or not this thing is working or not. And I think now is really the moment to face the truth. If your business isn't going anywhere, now is the best time to close or pivot. So my advice to a lot of government officials is just not to rescue startups and yet to help them set the course on the right path, or correct them to the right course. A lot of governments try to bail out startups at this time. I don't think it's the right thing to do. a lot of these startups, they believe they'll get through this period by getting free money from governments. I think it's wrong. It's wrong for government to bail out startups at this time. Now it's important for government to look at what will become, what the world will become after the COVID-19, and really focus on resources and energy and a direction on those new trends, and also direct the startups to work on those problems and coming up with the solutions. It is wrong to just throw money at startups and just ask them to survive the company as long as they can during this period. And I think we have to be responsible in what we do, and instead of just rescuing the companies. And on the regulation side, I feel right now it's also the best time to fast track a lot of innovation. For example, on the pandemic-related solutions and products and services, it's important to develop a sort of a sandbox or fast track scheme, so that testing kits or the anything that used data or AI or anything that's related to medical device or some sort of medical innovation can be treated as fast as possible without sacrificing the health of the general public. And it's also the time to think about Asia's strength, which I think in a large part is manufacturing. Part of the reason why US is suffering right now is because they don't have manufacturers. A lot of their factories moved to China, and now they can't even get masks. So now it's important to digitize or initiate digital transformation for all the manufacturings. And now to really develop a AI and industrial 4.0 manufacturing scheme. And with that, I think we will be a much agile and much more competitive economies as we come around facing this new type of pandemic, which is going to exist for a long time to come. And so for me, I think it's important to look at the big picture and don't underestimate the long-term change that this can happen, and really work on the long-term solution rather than the short-term bailout. In startups world, you don't really need to bail out startups. I think good startups survive, raise money, and they thrive after this. Good inventions come out of bad times. In the year 2000, Google came out of the internet bubble. In the 2008, when financial crisis, Lehman Brothers, sharing economy companies like Uber, Airbnb emerged. So I have faith and optimism towards startups. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Yes, so it sounds like the coronavirus is definitely something that's on everyone's mind, whether it's from a business side, whether it's from a regulatory side. But I know we don't have much time left, but one other big issue that's I know been on a lot of people's mind, everyone's been the whole Luckin Coffee situation. So I wanted to ask, what major lessons do you guys think we can learn from cases like Luckin Coffee? Any solutions to avoid such situation? And how do you think these solutions would affect the Chinese tech space in general? William, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So to some extent, it's actually VC's fault. You have some amazing entrepreneurs out there, and they're pushed to grow. And so here's a bunch of money, and we need you to grow. And if you grow to this certain level, then we'll give you more money. But if you don't, then you're dead, or we take over your company or something like that. And sometimes people forget that you're supposed to say, yeah, you grow, but you grow for real. Don't fake it. And so one of our mentors, Catherine Lee, out of Hong Kong, she always gives a session on how to do due diligence and how to figure out how actually fraud is done, especially in e-commerce and areas. It's actually pretty hard to detect. And a lot of times it's like, hey, listen, you wanted me to grow, so I grew. The fact that they bought their own product, it wasn't real growth. So I think VCs have a responsibility to of course, set expectations and help, but also educate and make sure that it's not growth at any cost, especially if you're faking it.
Right. Patrick, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just in addition to what William just said, I think right now we're talking about two different things. One is obviously the VC part, what William is talking about. I think the part I would like to talk about is more on the political side. So what we're going to see in the next forthcoming 1 or 2 generations, at least in my opinion, I think there'll be a greater anti-China sentiment, where we've seen a lot of new regulations come from the US saying foreign companies have a certain higher bar to get to for Chinese companies, and we're seeing a big exodus of Chinese companies which are listed in the US to come back to Hong Kong for secondary listings. And obviously because of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of anti-China feelings from both political side and also from the normal guy on the street in places in North America and Europe. In one way it's good, and in another way it's not so good. And from a human being point of view, then it's not as good because we're getting a lot of xenophobia. On the plus side, it just means that there's more business coming back to places like Hong Kong. It means that China will probably put in more money into Hong Kong, which is good news for people like Jane and myself who operate in Hong Kong. Another point I want to share is, because of this media drive that China has cooked the books and so forth, the reality is there's always going to be fraud and con men in whatever jurisdiction when there's money concerned. So we've seen fraudulent scandals in Japan with Olympus. We saw the big Enron case, then we had the Madoff Ponzi scheme and so on. So the list is endless, and the list will always go on when there's financial markets or anything. But it's just the media have ridden on the bandwagon saying, oh, China, 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 China. So from our point of view, the way to do it is we just have to be, as investors, put in more checks and balances to ensure that when the entrepreneurs or the management team have to set certain criteria or ways of doing it, where we have more checks on how the money is spent, where it's spent, when it's spent, in order to mitigate this. I don't think there will ever be 100% foolproof way of stopping this. It's just like William said, it's just very, very difficult to detect, and probably after the damage is done, that's when you find out. So Lucking coffee scandal will continue, and there'll be many more examples, but we just have to keep improving, and then it'll be a combination of the government implementing more stringent rules, but at the same time, if it's more stringent, like the MiFID rules in Europe, then it causes such a stranglehold on companies that they're not able to operate, normally and profitably. So it has to be a balance. But from an investor standpoint, we have to put in extra guidelines, or we get more involved with a hands-on approach.
Right. I think that's very helpful. I think that's very enlightening. Everything has like pros and cons. There's actually a more holistic view on everything. It's not just a one-sided 2D dimension story to everything. I think we're out of time today, unfortunately. I know there's so many other questions I wanted to ask all of you and so much more I could learn, but unfortunately we're at our 2:30 time. But thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope everyone got to take away some important new insight today.
Yeah, thank you very much all, and it's my pleasure to host you a digital week online. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.